So, it's that time again. Soulbinds, covenants, specifically the abilities, are the new hot topic of what could potentially fail this particular expansion. Been holding out my thoughts on them for quite a while now, since Alpha, but this seems like a good time to talk about its bad sides, as I feel I cover the good ones on my many class previews. More of them to come. I've read many points and essays from a vast number of people from every style of play within the game and fellow content creators, so why not add one more video to the records and hammer down some more points about player choice surrounding Covenants in Shadowlands. I always did guides, right, on this channel. Always been my thing. But the way I saw my class guides was to set players on the right path. I wasn't there to try and pretend I was gonna get someone to rank 1. There is more in-depth sources that I tried to point out. But I was there to try and show people, be from LFR level, be from heroic level, that this is how your spec works and the cool things you can do with it, because there's nothing worse than playing your spec wrong or your class wrong and not having fun. But once you understand it, once you understand what it can do, you will have fun if you liked that class in the first place. The numbers stuff comes later for me. So, let's not talk about numbers. Let's talk about the universal, albeit subjective language, fun. So everyone understands. And I know that's a bit of a meme right now in WoW, but bear with me. Let's take my position as a decay, specifically as an unholy decay, for the first example. I don't necessarily need to min-max my character. I primarily do heroic, so the content that I do doesn't ask for that for the most part. I can dabble on Mythic, but it's not a big deal. The same goes for Mythic Plus. As long as I can do a 15 plus or whatever is needed for quote-unquote loot at the end of the week, that's good enough for me. I'll still try and make my class the best it can perform within my own means, but technically I don't need to bend over backwards because none of my content requires that. So that's my position. So I can give myself the luxury to choose the fun option of Covenants. Supposedly, anyway. So with that in mind, I really love the Necrolords in Shadowlands. I just think they are pretty cool. Their theme is awesome, their story is cool, their transmog and mounts are badass, but their Covenant ability on decays on offer isn't that fun to use. Maybe fun sometimes, but not always. It's a very situational grip, and besides that, it's simply AoE damage that I'm just gonna press on cooldown, and that's it. Not very interesting. What I like is the Nightfey ability. It has this new awesome death and decay. Death's due. It's super powerful. I can actually create different builds within my talents to use it, focus on specific legendaries, seemingly, to improve it further, or even, maybe, conduits. I can actually have some fun with this ability within my class and spec. I can do some pretty cool things. Moreover, it's also awesome for blood. So if I want to tank, as an off-spec, I'm gonna have a great time. But to do that, I'm gonna have to abdicate a big part of my Shadowlands experience. My favorite Covenant and campaign, maybe my favorite mini-event, my favorite transmog and mount that I wanted to work for. Whatever Covenant you choose, that is gonna become your zone where you're gonna do most world quests and where a large part of your interaction with the endgame content and progression outside of instanced content, the mall, and likely future patches, it will all be there in that Covenant zone, in your Covenant sanctum, and its respective zone. Why then are you making me choose between what I find to be fun to play in my class and my personal cosmetic and thematic preferences that harm nobody? Here's another example of how annoying this system can be. Let's imagine I want to go Kyrian. I really like Kyrian. I get this dot ability, right? That is really good for single target damage and the 5% damage reduction buff. This is quite fun to use in raids, single target fights, but pretty boring in dungeons. And one day, I want to tank. But this ability isn't that fun for tanks, it's not that useful. So I would prefer something like the Night Fae or the Necrolords, as it's so much more useful and fun to use as blood. But the game isn't realistically allowing me to. Sure, I can change covenants, but that will mean abdicating, again, all my cosmetic preferences and thematic preferences. It's simply an awful decision to make and position to be in. But even if I don't care about the cosmetic and lore side of covenants, I'm still going through all this trouble of changing covenant, grinding soulbinds again, leveling them up, conduits, renown, and all that covenants entail with our in-game progression, which is a lot, mind you, seemingly. Even with whatever catch-up systems we might get, what if I regret the choice and I want to go back to my old covenant, my old ability, because I changed specs again or whatever? Now I get punished even further because going back to a covenant where you were before punishes you even harder. I was simply trying to have fun with the game, trying to find what I found to be fun, utilizing the tools that are part of my class, and why am I being so punished for it? And this is not about making a meaningful choice. We all just trying to have fun in the game. These situations happen, and the current system is simply making it extra hard to enjoy it all. They're all just feeling like awful choices, because a lot of the times, for some specs, you may love the theme of a covenant, they're awesome, really, but you hate the ability, or vice versa. Or it won't work that well with other specs you want to play or may want to try out at some point. Maybe you don't even know that you want to try out at some point. And then you're gonna have to face that hurdle, that wall, that challenge. And so many Covenant abilities work great for some specs, but awful on others, especially on hybrid specs, and no amount of tuning is gonna change that. It's simply how they work fundamentally and mechanically. So many people are gonna hit walls with this system. The only players that won't have a problem whatsoever is if the stars align and the Covenant ability that you find the most fun, remember I'm not touching numbers here, is also your preferred Covenant when it comes to cosmetics and story. And you also must be one spec forever kind of player. And yes, you get to try out these abilities while leveling through Shadowlands. But that's meaningless. There's so many variables here. What if you're not playing your main spec to level because you main a tank or a healer? What if you didn't have enough time to really check if that ability was fun or not, say in dungeons? You cannot expect that decision to be made clearly just after a few hours of leveling. And I also got to say this. Choosing two abilities, one big one and a couple of passives, Soulbinds, isn't a meaningful choice. Equivalent to choosing your class or subclass, as sometimes Blizzard marks it as. These abilities are glorified talents, let's be honest. I played them. They are pretty cool. But put a different stint and they could be in our talent row. Only a few of them actually feel they could come out of that specific covenant, as they are so well themed around them. But most of them, again, are glorified talents that feel out of place sometimes, like a decay dealing arcane damage through a dot. Or abilities that have no synergy at all with your spec mechanics. That happens a lot, as you could see in my class previews. A perfect example can be made in our talents right now. Imagine if our last tier talent, which generally has pretty big and important abilities, wasn't a simple choice of picking a talent and then you can change through a tome, but was tied to some reputation, and you chose Glacial Spike because it looked cool, right? But it would then soft lock you out of Thermal Void, and you couldn't change in between them unless you went through all of this trouble of changing faction, of regrinding content, while giving up your preferred cosmetic options. This idea of choosing a covenant like it's a subclass or it's a super meaningful choice that players need to make as it's something that has been missing from WoW as an RPG is absolute bull. Pardon my straightforwardness. I actually went and tried to remember rather, any other RPG that soft lock you out of these power choices in the middle of the game while having cosmetics attached. Most of them allowed you to freely do whatever you wanted when it came to power, and fundamentally they are single-player games, so it's already a bad comparison, but nevertheless, I looked further and I was able to think and remember Dragon Age Origins. In Dragon Age Origins, you have 3 main classes, with 4 specializations that you could choose to go for much later in the game. They weren't mandatory, I believe, but they were very similar to Covenants. The powers. They had a theme that was generally attached to a character in the game, or a faction in the game, and locked you out of the other choices, and you couldn't go back, like a Berserker, or a Champion, or a Templar, as part of the Warrior class. But they were providing 4 active abilities. They were actually changing your main class. They were changing your warrior to be more aggressive in combat, or provide more buffs to your group, or becoming this almost Death Knight, leeching health from enemies. You could become a Templar, so almost like a paladin, having spells and being able to deal with magic users more easily. This is a subclass choice that makes sense, that you wouldn't be able to go back on, just like your class. Now, a single ability that is vaguely themed around a specific covenant that you're picking, and a handful of passive while also taking in consideration all the cosmetic aspects, isn't a meaningful subclass choice. It's simply an awful decision to make, where you feel like you're being torn to opposite sides at the same time. Practically all other RPGs do not have these meaningful choices tied to power and abilities. They do have them, however, is tied to the story, characters, events, the world, cosmetics. I keep going back and forth about Covenant choices for my possibly main, and it's not even close to release date. Do I go for the one I like the most thematically for my DK, like the Necrolords or the Venthyr, or I just have to live with cosmetics and stories that I don't care about as much to actually have fun with my class, with the Night Fae ability? Or do I go to a different class entirely and try my luck there? Like, genuinely, what a shitty position some of us feel in. All in a game where we are all just trying to have fun. Then we have the Soulbinds, and more specifically the Conduits. Soulbinds on themselves, the traits, they're fine. They're not a big deal. And once again, let's not talk about percentages and about min-maxing for every inch of percentage to get ahead. Let's once again talk about fun. Let's imagine you, as a Frost Mage, you have your favorite conduits. You've been having a lot of fun. But you've seen some fire mages do some crazy things. They turning into flames and melting enemies, so you want to try some of that out. Fire spells are pretty cool, right? Well, first you have to deal with a whole Covenant ability debacle that we discussed. What if the ability you picked for Frost is pretty unfun or simply doesn't work that well for Fire? Yeah, again, that can happen. But you decide to go for it anyway. Well, you're also gonna need to farm Fire potency conduits, which is fine, so you put in the time to grind them out. And when you're about to place them, you realize that you don't want to use any other Soulbind or path than your Frost one, like say Nadia. Why? Because your current path has some traits that you really like, that you find fun, and allows for 3 potency conduits. And there are some really juicy conduits for Fire, so you definitely want to have 3 potency. And this is the only Soulbinds and path that offers such option. So you're gonna have to replace all those conduits to try out Fire properly, destroying your Frost ones in the process, as you think that Fire is gonna be the shit. Believe me, I've been there. I'm sure you've been there as well with something similar in the game where we just dive into something because we think it's gonna be super awesome. But after a few weeks, or even days, yeah, Fire is cool, but you miss the slows, right? You miss your orbs, you miss your blizzard, and your pet, your little pet, so you decide to go back. But then it hits you. You destroyed all of your Frost conduits as you replaced them, as you thought that Fire was gonna be this most awesome spec ever. Some of those actually took you some time to get, so now you're in this awful position of playing something you're not enjoying anymore, or play a worse version than you were previously and having to replay, regrind all of your conduits and content. Or you quit. Trust me, this would be a situation that many people would quit on. Now, isn't that shit? Once again, this is not talking about changing conduits or abilities because I want to min-max this dungeon or boss or whatever. This is just situations, things that go through players' minds when playing the game. Simply trying to have fun, finding something to have fun with the game, trying out new things. That's a big part of WoW. That's a big part of playing a spec and class in WoW. At this point, it's just kind of tiresome to constantly fight against these strict, punishing, and fun systems that had so much potential to just be fun and enjoyable. If the goal is to try and break the meta by trying to have everyone playing something different, isn't gonna work. You're just adding these pointless hurdles to everyone. And as far as the min-maxers go, they're gonna overcome it anyway, by any means necessary. There is a path, there is a way to overcome it, but they're gonna have a god-awful time while doing it. And for what, right? For what? An impossible goal? A meaningless goal? What is then the fix? There's many suggested ones. Conduits are really easy to tackle, in my opinion. You can turn them into essences and have a list to pick. This is my favorite so far. It's simple, feels familiar, while also allowing for customization, pretty much turning them into glyphs. As for the Covenant abilities, there's two ways you could go about it. One, changing the graphical effect, so every Covenant gets every ability, and you can choose which one to pick within your Covenant sanctum, like conduits, though that would require a lot of work, and some abilities may look off. Not all, but some. My preferred method, however, was to simply separate the cosmetic side from the power. All these people in Shadowlands, the factions, they love us. We, the Mall Walker, and through leveling, we've been helping them out a whole lot. Hell, they even gave us a taste of their power. So why not make a pact with a faction, a covenant for power, but ally yourself with a specific one for your base of operations. So say pick Vinthier, so the Raven Wrath zone will be where all of your Covenant business will be held, while using the Necrolord's powers. Couldn't they work together for the greater good? As far as I know, neither of these factions specifically hate each other, and though it might not make perfect sense lore-wise, it can be easily rewritten. The same is not applied for players and their enjoyment of the game. I don't know, man. Shadowlands is looking great. It truly is. Yes, Soulbinds and Covenants are a huge pain right now. But gear progression, Torghast, video coming on that soon, so check it out. The zones, dungeons, and likely the raid are all looking pretty sweet, pretty awesome. Class design is also a little bit better. Hell, Covenants on themselves are also pretty goddamn cool. But the true meaning of no fun allowed, the meme itself, it slapped hard in this particular side of Shadowlands. It's not even funny. So, let's not ruin it. See you in the beta.